Like what we're doing here at Cube for Two? Click the like and subscribe button to let us know. Also, Cube for Two is now a TCG Player affiliate. Click the link in the show notes for all your shopping needs to help support the channel. Alright guys, let's get started. What's good, Cubers? It's your boy Matt, and it's time to talk about Ikoria previews and what we want to add to our cubes. We got a lot to cover, so without further ado, let's get started. First up is Lava Brink Venturer. For 2 and a white, you get a 3/3 human soldier. As Lava Brink Venturer enters the battlefield, choose odd or even. Lava Brink Venturer has protection from each converted mana cost of the chosen value. So what we have right here is a aggro 3/3 with some serious upside. If you're having trouble getting through, you can name the CMC of your opponent's blockers so that Lava Brink then effectively has unblockable. Or if you're playing him on turn 3 and it's about to be your opponent's turn 3 or turn 4, you name a creature of odd or even CMC respectively, and suddenly this guy can still crash through. I think he's fine. I think he's very playable. I don't know that I like him as much as Brimaz, King of Oreskos, or Kinjali. I think the flying on Kinjali and the creatures entering tapped is better upside. I like that Brimaz cross-pollinates with my token decks, so I think the Lava Brink Venturer is fine, especially in larger cubes, but I don't know that he's going to make my cube. Next up, though, we have a spicy card that I definitely intend to playtest, and that is the Luminous Broodmoth. For 2 and double white, you get a 3/4 flying creature. Whenever a creature you control without flying dies, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control with a flying counter. Now, back in Theros, I talked about this card called Nightmare Shepherd and how I didn't really like it because I didn't care for the 1/1s and I didn't like that it was a Baneslayer. And Luminous Broodmoth is a Baneslayer also. It's a card that doesn't give us value the moment it hits the field. It's not great on an empty board. But when it brings your creatures back, it brings them back with flying. That's just such a huge upside. They keep their original bodies, they keep all their abilities, and they come back with flying. Holy crap, this card is sweet. I'm definitely going to try it out. I think it's very cubable. It's super spicy. I like this card a lot. Let's move on to blue, though, because white doesn't offer a lot. Now, you might have noticed right then that I skipped all the white cards with Mutate. So let's talk a little bit about Mutate with this next card, and that's the Sea Dasher Octopus. For 1 and double blue, you get a creature Octopus with Mutate for 1 and a blue. It's a 2/2 with Flash. Whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, you can draw a card. You aren't going to see me talking about most of the Mutate cards because it's a great way to get 2 for 1. Otherwise, the Mutates are just vanilla bodies. In order for a Mutate card to be cubable, both sides of the card have to be decent. That is to say that if I play the Sea Dasher Octopus as a 3-mana 2/2 body with Flash that has an upside, is that still playable? And the answer is it's not great, but it's playable. And then the Mutate ability gives us a curious obsession effect, but we get to do it at Flash speed, which means our opponent can not block, and then we can flash in the Mutate so that when our creature actually connects, we can get some immediate value. Now, you do still open yourself up to being 2 for 1, but I like the Sea Dasher Octopus in a tempo-style deck featuring cards like Warkite Marauder, where we can slam him down at flash speed on our opponent's instep, or we can mutate onto other creatures at flash speed to help make sure we get value. So I like the Sea Dasher Octopus as a playtest card. Most of the other Mutate creatures aren't very good. We're going to talk about one more later that I do plan to playtest, but if you're supporting some kind of blue tempo package in your cube, Sea Dasher Octopus is probably worth a look. Now next up, let's talk about one of the best 3-mana counterspells we've seen in a long time, and that's Neutralize. For 1 and double blue, you can counter target spell, but it has cycling for 2. I love modal cards. And this card is a cantrip that control decks can use early to make sure they hit their land drops, or that you can hold up later as a counterspell. It is a much better version of Cancel. It's probably not as blatantly powerful as Forbid, but if you need to hit your land drops, or your opponent has landed a threat while you were tapped out and now you need a spot removal spell, Neutralize can turn itself into something else, whereas Forbid in your hand is always Forbid. I like Neutralize a lot. I'm definitely going to be cubing it. I think you should be too. Still in blue, we got another great flash creature. Wizards is all about giving us flash creatures lately, and that's the Voracious Great Shark. For 3 in double blue, you get a 5/4 shark with flash. When Voracious Shark enters the battlefield, counter target artifact or creature spell. Now, a lot of people have been comparing Voracious Great Shark to Torrential Gearhulk. But the thing is that it's not Torrential Gearhulk, because Torrential Gearhulk can 2-for-1 your opponent in a way that Voracious Great Shark really can't. So you can play the Gearhulk and then flash a spell out of your yard and murder an opponent's creature and then block and kill another one. You're not going to be able to do that with the Great Shark. The Great Shark is going to counter a spell, and it's a creature or artifact spell, so it's sorcery speed. You're not going to be able to do this during combat, and then your opponent's going to know the shark is there during combat. But now there's also the possibility that you just hold Voracious Great Shark up throughout your opponent's entire turn, and then you just flash him down on end step, similar to Thrix the Sudden Storm that we got last set. I actually like the Great Shark more because of the counterspell upside. Whereas Thrix says spells you cast with converted mana cost 5 or greater cost 1 less and can't be countered, which is really hosing against the control deck, but Voracious Great Shark is better against every other deck. So I like the Great Shark if you're looking for an interesting blue 5-drop. They've gotten really good lately. Cavalier of Gales is a beast. But if you're looking to try out something else, Voracious Great Shark is probably up your alley. I think the card is going to be pretty good. Maybe not cube staple good, but still going to be pretty doggone good. Speaking of cube staple good, let's talk about my pick from this set, and a lot of others if you've been paying attention to cube content creators, and that's Shark Typhoon. This card is gross. So for 5 and a blue, ignore that mana cost, we're not paying it, you get an enchantment that says, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create a XX blue shark creature token with flying, where X is that spell's converted mana cost. Wonderful. Cycling. X1 and a blue, when you cycle Shark Typhoon, create a XX blue shark creature token with flying. So, Zolthux explained this best on Twitter as you're not going to want to cast this spell, what you're going to want to do is cycle it, because cycling means it can't be countered, and when you cycle it you make a body, and the body scales up over the course of the game, and because you cycle the Typhoon, not only did you make the body, but you also draw a card. This is another copy of Cloud Conceer. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card, and all that's great and wonderful, except Typhoon is uncounterable. You're using cycling, and since you're using cycling, that also gives the Cloud Conceer flash. You can do this at instant speed. So later in the game, you can cycle Shark Typhoon to make a big body to draw a card, to flash in the creature, to eat your opponent's attacker. I just love this card. Cycling, baby. We're not hard casting this thing. We're making flying body sharks, sharknadoing it up, and drawing cards. I am loving Shark Typhoon. This card's going to be sweet. That brings us to black. Black has a few cards for us to look at. My favorite, but maybe not the most powerful, is Bastion of Remembrance. For 2 and a black, you get an enchantment. When Bastion of Remembrance enters the battlefield, make a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Bastion of Remembrance adds density to our Aristocrat deck. It's actually a Zulaport Cutthroat, so that when one of your creatures dies, you get the Drain effect. But it also makes a 1/1 human soldier creature token, so it makes the body, and it has the effect. You'll notice the big difference here is the mana cost. Bastion costs 3 mana, and Artist and Cutthroat each cost 2. But I also think there's a big upside to this extra mana, and that is that Bastion of Remembrance is an enchantment, which makes it way harder for your opponent to interact with. So I'm definitely going to be giving this a go in my cube to see how much more or less I like it than Zulaport Cutthroat. I think my aggressive Aristocrat decks won't like it as much, but my more grindy ones will like it more, so I think we'll see. But I like this card, and if you are in a peasant cube, you have just found a way to introduce this archetype into your cube and make it super dense, and Bastion is perfect for you guys. And if you're in a bigger cube, this is one more Blood Artist effect to help increase your density. So I think Bastion is going to see some cube play, and I think the card is pretty doggone good. But let's move on to another card that I think is worth looking at for peasant environments. I get some complaints in the comments that I don't spend enough time on you guys, so let me introduce you to Easy Prey. For 1 and a black, you can destroy target creature with converted mana cost 2 or less, or you can cycle it away. Now, in case you haven't figured it out, I'm a big fan of cycling. Easy Prey is going to be sweet in peasant environments. because you can remove threats early, and then later, when you don't have to worry about 2 mana cost creatures anymore, you cycle Easy Prey into a better card. I think the card is very playable at the peasant level, probably not in traditional powered, unpowered cubes, but the set did give us a staple removal spell, so let's talk about Heartless Act. For 1 and a black, you get an instant, choose one. Destroy target creature with no counters on it, or remove up to 3 counters from target creature. Guys, this is a better Doomblade. This is a better Doomblade. We have finally got a great removal spell to add to our black sections that is better than all the old standbys. I love Heartless Act. Now let's take a good look at Doomblade. Doomblade says destroy target non-black creature. I run roughly 25 black creatures in my cube. That doesn't count the gold section, so I'm probably closer to 30 or so. Heartless Act will kill all those creatures. Doomblade will not. Heartless Act won't kill creatures with counters on them. I'll have to remove the counters, which will kill some creatures, like maybe a small Hydroid Krasis, but everything else it's just shrinking. But I don't have 30 creatures with +1/+1 counters in my cube on them, so Heartless Act is going to be a better removal spell than Doomblade. It's still probably not as good as Go for the Throat, because I don't have that many artifact creatures compared to +1/+1 creatures, but it doesn't matter. Heartless Act is now an auto-include. It's your staple. Pick up your foil copies, go ahead and grab them. Card is super sweet. Let's move on to red and look at a card that I think might be good for Pauper cubes, and that's Fire Prophecy. For 1 and a red, Fire Prophecy deals 3 damage to target creature. You may put a card from your hand on the bottom of your library. If you do, draw a card. So you get to rummage instead of loot. Now this is very similar to a card like Magma Jet. I think the Scry is better than the discard and hope to draw, but still it allows the red player to discard excess lands or cards that it doesn't need to try and dig down through its deck and obtain some value, and I think at the Pauper level, this is pretty good. The major difference between Fire Prophecy and Magma Jet is the ability to go face. That's really what we want from Burn, especially in our traditional unpowered cube, which is why it can't make the cut at that level. But when you get down to the Pauper level, the Burn just is not as good, and so maybe if you're playing Pauper level cube, you might try out Fire Prophecy. I think the extra card draw, the filtering on the back end is going to be pretty decent, and that'll probably help it get there in that environment. Next up, I want to look at another burn spell. That's Flame Spill. For 2 and a red, Flame Spill deals 4 damage to target creature. Excess damage is dealt to that creature's controller instead. Now, y'all know I love me some uncubes, so when I saw this card, I knew immediately what I saw. This is Super Duper Death Ray. 3 mana, deal 4 damage, Super Duper Death Ray has Trample. Yeah. Way to go, Wizards. Way to reprint a card. By the way, I just want to point out, I like Trample on Super Death Ray better than the extra text on Flame Spill. We just talked about how we like for Burn to be able to go face, and while Flame Spill doesn't actually go face, it does let you burn out a small creature and then go face with the excess damage. So I do think there is upside there to be had at the peasant level. However, at the peasant level, you do get to play most of Red's best burn, so maybe unless your cube is a little larger, this still doesn't make the cut. But I wanted to talk about it because I do think it is a spicy include, and 4 damage will kill most creatures in most cubes. Next up, let's take a minute and look at the obligatory Planeswalker of the set. In this case, we're going to peek at Luca, the Coppercoat Outcast. For 3 and double red, you get a legendary Planeswalker Luca with 5 loyalty. +1, exile the top 3 cards of your library. Creature cards exiled this way gain. You may cast this card from exile as long as you control a Luca Planeswalker. -2, exile target creature you control, then reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card with a higher converted mana cost. Put that card onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And then -7, each creature you control deals damage equal to its power to your opponent. I really want to like this card. I really wanted to like Luca. I wanted him to do all the things. Here's the problem. Let's look at that +1. You're going to pay 5 mana and cast Luca, and then you're going to plus him and exile the top 3 cards of your library. Creature cards exiled this way gain. You may cast this card from exile. Well, you can't cast it. You just tapped out to play Luca, so we're not plussing him the turn he comes down. So the play line is that you play him and then you -2 to create a polymorph effect. And I have checked on this on multiple sources. If you -2 to exile target creature you control to trigger the polymorph effect, it happens exactly like polymorph, which means your opponent could bolt the creature, and then your -2 would not resolve, it would fizzle, and you would get no value at all, and that's the part about Luca that really turns me off to him. When you try to downtick Luca, your opponent can burn, or bolt, or Heartless Act, yeah, new rule spells. They can do that to whatever creature you're targeting, and then you've pulled your loyalty off of Luca and you've whiffed on your effect. Now, if you do want to play Luca, I think he would fit great into those teamer cheat decks, those Oath the Druid style decks that always have fatties that you can -2 to flip into, because I think that's why you're really playing him. He's going to be great on an empty board the turn after he comes down, cause plussing him to play the best of 3 cards off your library is going to be pretty gross. But again, he's only for creature decks. You only get to play creatures that way. So there's a lot of limitations on Luca. He doesn't protect himself. I think it's very likely that he's bad if you have to play him into an empty board. He's too easy for your opponent to interact with. I wanted to like him, but I don't think he's going to get there in my cube. I'm probably going to playtest him, though, because that's what I do. Now we're going to move on to green, and I wanted to talk about a card just for the commander players out there real fast, Migration Path. For 3 and a green, you get to search your library for 2 basic land cards, put them on the battlefield tap, and then shuffle your library, cycling 2. Why am I talking about this card? Commander, that's it. I like this card for commander. It's a better explosive vegetation. Why? It has cycling. Yeah, cycling. That's it. Don't play 4 mana ramp spells in cube. Don't play 3 mana ramp spells in cube. 2 mana ramp, that's it, that's the rule. But I do like this card. Moving on, let's talk about another cool card that I like. Let's talk about Wilt. For 1 and a green, you can destroy target artifact or enchantment, cycling 2. This is a better naturalize. Return to nature. Naturalize. This card is better than both of those. Wizards keeps giving us upgraded versions of naturalize, I guess because they're trying to make one playable. You notice that they don't really see play in standard blocks, they don't see play in cube, they don't really see play in EDH, although sometimes they do, but I like that Wilt has cycling, and I might play test it. I think it's still probably a card that gets relegated to the sideboard, but cycling isn't nothing, and I prefer cycling to the exile target card from a graveyard on Return to Nature. It makes Wilt just a little more flexible, so if you're playing either of those cards, you can cut them out of your cube and play Wilt instead, especially you Pauper players. Just saying, another cycling card for y'all. Let's take a minute and talk about the last mutate monster that I think is really playable in cube and worth play testing, and that is Gem Razer. For 3 and a green, you get a creature beast 4/4 with mutate for 1 and double green, reach and trample. Whenever this creature mutates, destroy target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls. Now the 4 mana slot in green is busted. Alright, we are playing some premium threats like Night Pash Ambusher and Questing Beast, and that doesn't even count Thrun and Wicked Wolf and all the other busted stuff. So Gem Razer is going to be best played as a 3-drop, and at the 3-drop slot we have this effect on Thrashing Brontodon. However, Brontodon doesn't actually give us the effect at 3 mana, it gives it to us at 4 mana. So Gem Razer is in this really interesting middle ground that makes me want to playtest it, because worst case scenario, if I don't have a body, I pay 4 and I get a 4/4 reach trample, which isn't great, but it's fine. And then in other cases, I can mutate it onto the battlefield to upgrade another creature into a 4/4 with reach and trample and kill a artifact or an enchantment. I think Gem Razer is going to feel bad when there's an artifact you want to kill, but you don't have anything to mutate onto. But I think most of the time in the green deck, you're going to have bodies on the field, and if you don't, you're probably losing anyway. So Gem Razer, I think, is testable. I'm going to try it out. In my mind, I'm going to treat it as a 3-drop that has the upside of being played as a 4-drop if there's nothing to mutate it onto. That does open you up to the 2-for-1, but that's a whole nother discussion for mutate. This is the mutate card that I really want to playtest. I think it might be decent. Now, speaking of green cards that are decent, let's talk about Kogla, the Titan Ape. Kogla, the Titan. This is King Kong, all right? Kogla, this is King Kong, all right? We couldn't get the licensing rights, but that's who it is. For 3 and triple green, you get a 7/6 legendary ape. When King Kong enters the battlefield, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control. Whenever King Kong attacks, destroy an artifact or an enchantment the defending player controls. Pay 2, return target human you control to its owner's hand. King Kong gains indestructible until the end of turn. Now that human line at the bottom is mostly flavor text. It's only going to apply pretty much in a Selesnya deck. So I don't think you need to count on bouncing a lot of humans back to your hand. There aren't a lot of humans in green anyway. But when he ETBs, he fights a creature, and at 7/6, he's winning. That's pretty sweet, and I actually think it makes him better than, wait for it, Primeval Titan, who I am just wildly unimpressed with. It's no secret at this point anymore. As a matter of fact, I cut Primeval Titan to play Honored Hydra just because it's 2 bodies for when Primetime gets removed. At this point, the number 1 6-drop in green is Carnage Tyrant, and then everything else comes after that. I think our boy King Kong here is going to be pretty decent. I see him being around the 3rd, 4th, 5th in that range, green 6, so he's definitely playtestable. I think if you're supporting more token strategies in your cube, maybe you're playing Great Oak Guardian instead. But still, I think King Kong is very playable. I think I'm definitely going to playtest him, and I love the removal on his body when he comes down. That's Green's way of removing creatures, and Wicked Wolf has been so good at a 3/3 body. I'm really excited to see what King Kong here can do with that 7/6 body. That's going to bring me to another green fatty that I don't necessarily think is cube good, but there is something really spicy about him. And if you've been watching this video, you probably already know what it is. Let me introduce you to Titanoth Rex. For 7 in double green, you get an 11/11 Trampler. When you cycle Titanoth Rex, put a trample counter on the target creature, and then you can cycle it for 1 and a green. The spicy part? Cycling. See, this card is not castable. This is a card we cheat into play, and the big problem with the cheat deck is getting your creatures into the graveyard so that you can reanimate them. But cycling solves that problem and lets you dig for your reanimate spell, which I love. I love that so much. The part that I hate is that it has no value when it enters the battlefield, and it dies to all removal spells. That's why currently the best reanimation targets are cards like Hornet Queen and Woodfall Primus. Woodfall Primus dodges the first removal spell because it persists. Hornet Queen dodges the removal spell because she makes so many death-touching bugs with her. So they both are great reanimation targets in a way that Titanoth Rex is not, but Rex is so easy to get into the yard. I think I'm going to try him out. I just want to see how good that cycling can be when it's combined with reanimation effects. So I'm really excited about Titanoth Rex. I wish there was just a little more value when he entered the battlefield. Still, I think it's a spicy idea. That's going to bring us to the obligatory Planeswalker in green, and that's Vivian, Monster's Advocate. For 3 in double green, you get legendary Planeswalker Vivian with 3 loyalty. She's one of our static ability planeswalkers. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. You may cast creature spells from the top of your library. +1, create a 3/3 green beast creature token. Put your choice of a vigilance counter, reach counter, or a trample counter on it. -2, when you cast your next creature spell this turn, search your library for a creature card with lesser converted mana cost and put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. I like this Vivian. Now, the green 5 Planeswalker spot is getting a little crowded in my cube, but this is an experimental frenzy combined with a Garruk Primal Hunter, and those 3/3 green beasts are gross. Most cube tokens, most token creators in cube make 1/1s or 2/2s, so Vivian's beast tokens are going to outclass all of them, as they should. She's green, but she's not just making regular 3/3 green beast creature tokens like our boy Garruk over there. She gets to give them vigilance or reach or trample, whatever is relevant to the situation, which means that Vivian can plus make a beast and then put a reach counter on it to protect it from your opponent's flyers. Just so much value. And then the idea that I'm in the green deck and I've got an experimental frenzy for green creatures on the field, I don't think it's going to be as good as everyone says it is, because you're not normally running 20 green creatures, although you're normally running a lot, and the experimental frenzy lets you play anything off the top, which is just way more flexible. If you have a land on top, you're not going to be able to play it off the top of your library. So I don't think you're going ham with Vivian, but I do think that upside is going to be something, and it'll probably let you cast 1 or 2 cards during the match. The -2 is nice, and I think you'll do it occasionally, but the +1 is where Vivian is going to get her value at. I like this Vivian a lot, and I'm definitely playtesting her in my cube, and I think you should be also. Stay with me, guys, we're getting there. That brings us to colorless, and there's one colorless card I want to look at because there was a lot of buzz about it. I'm not that high on it myself. That's the Crystalline Giant. For 3, you get a artifact creature giant, 3/3. At the beginning of combat on your turn, choose a kind of counter at random that Crystalline Giant doesn't have on it from among Flying, First Strike, Death's Touch, Hexproof, Lifelink, Menace, Reach, Trample, Vigilance, and a +1/+1 counter. Put a counter of that kind on Crystalline Giant. Now, at the beginning of combat is key right here. You're going to be incentivized to play the Giant during your first main, so that you can then go to combat and put your first kind of counter on the Giant. Then on your next turn, when he's able to swing, he'll get his second counter. I don't like the randomness of it. I think it's entirely possible that you get a bad counter or a bad counter combination that's not very good. I also think that he's a 3/3 for 3, and that's not a great rate, especially amongst colorless cards. And if I'm being honest, I don't want to track 10 different kinds of counters. That's just me. I don't want to have to keep up with that, so I don't think I'm gonna. I'm not gonna play the Crystalline Giant. I think the rate's just not good on it if I'm being, honest from a power perspective, but also I just don't want to manage all those different abilities. That's just me though. You do your own thing. Crystalline Giant, he's not for me. I definitely think he's playable in lower power cubes though. Let's take a minute and talk about the Otter in the room, if you will, and that's Lutri the Spellcaster. Alright, here we go. For 1 hybrid is it, you get a 3/2 elemental Otter with Companion. Each non-land card in your starting deck has to have a different name for Lutri to be your companion. He has Flash, and when Lutri the Spellchaser enters the battlefield, if you cast a copy target instant or sorcery spell you control, you may choose new targets for the copy. Lutri is busted. Lutri is busted, and if you are running a high-powered, vintage-style cube with no rules, then you can slam Lutri and feel good about yourself. But for the rest of us, I think he's a hard pass. See, the companion mechanic is supposed to place a deck building restriction on the deck builder, but Lutri doesn't do that to us because we're in cube, which means any blue deck or any red deck can slam Lutri in the draft and then play him from their sideboard as a companion the entire rest of the night, which means they have 8 cards in their opening hand, their opponent knows that it's there, and they have to play around it the entire night. It's a flash body, so they have to take that into account every single combat, and the fact that their spells can be copied means once your opponent has about 5 mana that you can get double Doombladed pretty consistently, or double Lightning Bolt at the end of a game with aggro. I just don't like Lutri. He's just not for me. The card is busted, and it's plenty cube good if you want to play it. But I don't like that you don't actually have to meet a restriction to play it, and I don't like that Izzet is the only color pair that gets this, and it's just, Lutri is not for me. Let's talk about a companion that I do think is for me, and that's Lurrus of the Dream Den. For 1 hybrid Orzhov, you get a legendary creature, Cat Nightmare, 3/2. His companion restriction is each permanent card in your starting deck has a converted mana cost of 2 or less. He also has lifelink. During each of your turns, you may cast 1 permanent spell with a converted mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard. So unless your cube is heavily supporting Orzhov aggro, you're not likely to be able to companion Lurrus, although I am actually really interested to try. I do have a black aggro and a white aggro package, so #excitement. But I think Lurrus is good enough that he can just be played main deck, especially in like a grindy Aristocrats Orzhov deck that lets you keep casting your 1 and 2 drops out of the graveyard. So even if you don't get to play him out of the sideboard, he's so flexible to cast that I still think you can play him inside your deck, and he's hybrid, which means he could also see play in Rakdos decks and Boros decks and so on. So I'm not going to go too deep into that, but I think Lurrus here is actually playable, and the Orzhov guild is not as stacked as you think it is. Maybe it's time to trim Vindicate and try out Lurrus. I'm just saying, Vindicate's plenty good. Vindicate's awesome, but the cat is spicy. I want to try the cat. Speaking of companions, let's talk about the other fox in the room. So for 1 hybrid Boros, you get Zerda, the Dawnwaker Elemental Fox, 3/3. His companion restriction, each permanent card in your starting deck has an activated ability. Abilities you activate that aren't mana abilities cost 2 less to activate. This effect can't reduce the mana in that cost to less than 1 mana. Pay 1, tap, target creature can't block this turn. I don't know why we need that last line of text. This card does a frickin' plenty. So, Zerda here, at first glance, appears to me to be a combo card, right? Because the reducing mana cost to activate makes this guy go infinite with cards like Basalt Monolith and Grim Monolith. Everyone figured that out super quick. He also lets you put counters on Hangerback Walker and Walking Ballista much more easily. But my spiky friends pointed out to me that you could play a control deck with just Planeswalkers and Mana Rocks and other artifacts in it, and then Zirda just becomes a free body in your board because you weren't going to play creatures without activated abilities or anything without an activated ability anyway. And then I really didn't like the card. So now we have a Boros card that doesn't help any of my Boros decks, which are mostly aggro, and instead is being cheated into control decks and as part of combo decks. And again, those decks will be able to keep him in the sideboard at no cost. I don't really like Zirda either, but there's no doubt that the Fox is really strong, and if you're looking to do busted things or combo-y things inside your cube, Zirda is the man. I also want to point out, I'm not going to talk about the Selesnya companion, except to say that you can do the same thing with him in control decks. He is a tribal companion, but if you play no creatures, then you've met the restriction and you can play him out of your sideboard too. I think that's cheaty. I don't really like companion as a mechanic. I'm going to play Lurrus because I think he can fit into the main deck, but there's no doubt that Zirda and Lutri are both plenty cube good if you want to go that route. Let's move on to some other multicolor cards, though. I'm sick of these companions. Let's talk about General Kudrow of Danareth. For 1 white and a black, you get a legendary creature, Human Soldier, 3/3. Other humans you control get +1/+1. Whenever General Kudrow of Danareth or another human enters the battlefield under your control, exile target card from an opponent's graveyard. Also, you can pay 2, sack 2 humans, and destroy a creature with power 4 or greater. So if you are looking to support some kind of Orzhov humans tribe, then here's your boy. And that's really the only reason I mentioned him. He's not really strong enough for normal, untraditional powered cubes, but if you're looking to support some Orzhov humans, then General Kudrow of Danareth is your boy. The card I actually like out of this set is Dire Tactics. For white and the black, you get an instant exile target creature. If you don't control a human, lose life equal to that creature's toughness. If you are in a peasant environment and you're looking for a cheap or budget removal spell, Dire Tactics is your boy. Yes, it's going to cost you some life, but probably not much more than, a card like Anguished Unmaking. So you can play Dire Tactics at instant speed, just 2 mana. I kind of like it. It's a solid spell. Next up, though, let's go to Boros, where there's some interesting cards that actually help the Boros deck, maybe. I want to play test Regal Leosaur. I know this is not the card that everyone else is high on. We'll talk about that in a second, but I want to play test this guy, and here's why. For red and a white, you get a 2/2, and that's on rate. You can play him on turn 2 and get a 2/2 body. Now, I know the Boros deck needs perfect mana to do that, but still. The other spicy part I like about him is you can mutate him for 1 and Hybrid Boros. Hybrid Boros, when this creature mutates, other creatures you control get +2/+1 until the end of turn. Now, if your cube is constructed like mine, then your aggro deck's best turn 2 play isn't to play a 2-drop, it's to play 2 more 1-drops. So in my cube, if I have double 1-drops on turn 2, which is not uncommon, then on turn 3 or 4 I can mutate the Leosaur onto the battlefield, buff my whole board, and get in for 6 to 10 damage on turn 3 or 4, and that is a legit clock. I don't know how good it's going to be. I really just want to try it out. My aggro decks go wide really fast, so I think he'll be really good in that kind of environment. He's probably peasant playable as well, but if you are not running aggro decks that are stacking 7 or 8 1-drops, 9 1-drops inside of them, the Leosaur is not going to be for you. The rate won't be as good on the return. Let's talk about the next Boros card that everyone's super excited about, and I actually like the Leosaur better, and that's Winota, Joiner of Forces. For 2 red and a white, you get a legendary creature, Human Warrior Winota. 4/4 body. Whenever a non-human creature you control attacks, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may put a human creature card from among them onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking. It gains indestructible until the end of turn. Put the rest of the cards on the bottom of your library in a random order. Now, the Timmy Johnny player in me looks at this and goes, dang, I really want to build around this, and digging 6 deep is pretty good, but you're going to have her on the board and a non-human on the board, and turning both sideways and then hit another human inside your deck. And while I realize that it can happen, I'm willing to bet that most of the time for 4 mana, this is not going to cut it. When you're hitting that point in your aggro deck where you're slamming your 4-drops, you want to be starting to close out the game, and I don't think Winota represents that. I would much rather play Hero of Blade Hold or one of Red's 4 drops than play her and go ahead and get some immediate value to make my board a little bit wider. So Winota's not for me, but the Regal Leosaur, yeah, you heard it here first. I'm really excited about that card. And that brings us to Simek, and we get to talk about the other busted card in this set. Meet Keenan Bonder Prodigy. For green and a blue, you get a legendary creature human druid. Whenever you tap a non-land permanent for mana, add 1 mana of any type that permanent produced. Pay 7, look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may put a non-human creature card from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So what our Bonder Prodigy here does... sorry, Bonder. No, you didn't hear that. This is a family podcast. Anyway, he makes all our mana dorks and our rocks tap for double mana, which is pretty good. I think it gets substantially better when you move into powered cubes, and now suddenly your moxes are tapping for 2, which means that you could play him on turn 1, and then on turn 2 have 4 or 5 mana. It's just gross. So I think he's pretty busted. I'm going to try him. For me, he's probably now the... I don't know, Simek has gotten so good. He's probably the 4th or 5th best Simek card you could be playing in a cube that would support this kind of strategy. If you're not playing a lot of rocks, or your Simek deck isn't playing a lot of dorks, then maybe he's not for you. But for everyone else, I rank this guy right there behind Oko and Krasis and Uro, and then maybe this guy right here. He's going to be pretty busted. He's going to be really good for those green ramp decks, those Simek ramp decks that want to pump out big creatures, and being non-human is not really going to be much of a restriction in a Simek deck. That brings us to Izzet, where we have a cute little dragon fairy. Oh my goodness, he's so adorable. So for red and a blue, you get a fairy dragon 1/1 flying haste. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Sprite Dragon. I like this card. I do. I wish I had a peasant cube to play it in, because I don't think it's quite good enough for traditional unpowered cubes, but the card looks like a lot of fun for those red-blue tempo-y decks at lower power levels. I just like him, and he's substantially easier to cast than cards like Crackling Drake. So Sprite Dragon, if you're looking for a low power spells matter payoff, this might be your guy. Instead, let's talk about Riel the Everwise. For 1, a blue, and a green, you get a legendary creature, Human Wizard. Riel the Everwise gets +1/+0 for each instant or sorcery card in your graveyard. Ignore that. Whenever you discard 1 or more cards for the first time each turn, draw that many cards. Let's talk about how good that is. So you have Riel on the board, and then you cast Faithless Looting. You draw 3 cards, and then you discard 2 cards. But that's the first time we've discarded this turn, so now we draw 2 more cards. This is really going to let those blue-red decks churn through their decks. Now, Izzet is a very stacked guild. I'm probably still going to playtest this card, but you've got Dak, Saheeli is over there as well. It's a very strong guild, but I'm still going to test Riel, even though she's probably not good enough just because she dies to so many different effects. She gets burned out, and I wish she could block a little better. But I think the card is pretty decent, and it'll be very good in Commander for those of you who want to try that there. But moving on, let's go to Golgari, and we can look at a great card that's not a removal spell in the Fiend Artisan. For hybrid Golgari, you get a 1/1 nightmare creature. Fiend Artisan gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard. You can pay X and hybrid Golgari, tap, sack another creature, search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost X or less, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. This card is like a baby Tarmogoyf, kinda sort of. So what's gonna happen is it's gonna get bigger for every creature in your yard, but it's also gonna give us some late game upside. Early on we might have used a card like Llanowar Elves to help ramp out some threats, but now as the game is getting later we need to hit another body, so we sack off the Llanowar Elf and go get a card like Thragtusk. And paying 6 mana to go get Thragtusk is really not that bad of a deal. So I love the utility on the Fiend Artisan. I love that it grows with the size of your yard, because Golgari decks like to self-mill a lot. I love me some Fiend Artisan. I am dying to playtest this card and see how it does inside my cube. And that brings us to the lands, boys and girls. We are almost home. Let's take a minute and look at the Triome cycle. People are really excited about these lands. So let's point out the obvious. These lands tap for 3 colors, and they have land types stapled to them, which makes them fetchable. They are playable in almost every deck, but again, not every deck wants these. Like that Savvy Triome, my red, white, black decks, they don't want tap lands. So I don't know that you want to play the whole cycle, but if you are just starting out in Cube, these are going to be excellent. If you're not playing fetch lands, I don't know that I want to go to the trouble to play these at all. I think you might as well just play regular tap lands. They'll certainly be much cheaper than these guys are going to be. Thank you, Commander. The other upside to all these lands is that they have cycling, so that if you draw them late game, you can just cycle them away. And as you have, in case you hadn't figured it out, your boy Matt is a big fan of cycling, so I like being able to cycle these away. But your boy Matt is also OCD, and there's only 5 of these, and there's 10 shards, wedges, whatevers, and the point is there's only 5 of these, so I'm highly bothered by that. Still, there is nothing wrong with playing these lands. They're going to provide good fixing, especially if you have fetched lands. So if you're in a larger cube and you want your mana fixing to be better, I think these become slam dunk includes. If you are already playing the tricolor tap lands, you can play these tricycle lands instead. But I don't know that they're the cube slam dunks that everybody says they are. Well, that's going to do it for Ikoria set review, boys and girls. If you think I missed any cards or you want to get my takes on them, leave them for me in the comments below and I'll take a look. You can always catch me on Twitter at Cube42. Like, subscribe, do all the things. And as always, and until next time, shuffle up, stay safe, and keep cubing, my friends.